This is dedicated to all my beautiful queens, all my beautiful ladies out there. She's a queen. Go queen. You got it, girl. She's a queen. You better represent. Go queen. Go queen. Go. She's a queen about her business. Queen. Working hard on a mission. Yeah. Head high, purpose driven. Purpose driven. Crown on never tilted. Queen. Go queen. Go queen. Go queen. Go. Represent. You're a queen. You're a queen. Oh.
So thank you guys for joining another episode of the Key Chat. Today I have a very special guest, Miss Kia Harris Carr, and we're going to be having a conversation in acknowledgement of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I wanted to touch on some topics regarding post-separation abuse. And in addition, with this also being a month that acknowledges breast cancer awareness, Kia has a great foundation called the Beautiful Faces Foundation, and it helps people who have dealt with domestic violence, and it also helps women who have dealt with cancer who are also dealing with domestic violence as well. So she has a wonderful foundation. So I do want to talk about that as well. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for chatting with me today. And like I said, your foundation, it covers quite a bit and it's really beautiful. So I wanted to start off with just talking about your personal experience. I know that you had a double diagnosis within like 32 days of each other. So I wanted to start off and talk about that first before we talk about domestic violence and your foundation.
Sure. The two actually tie into each other quite a bit. When I received my diagnosis, I know that you did another segment recently that spoke to the age lowering under that 40 kind of baseline for diagnosis of breast cancer and other cancers. And so I was 37 years old, received my first diagnosis, and then 32 days later found out about the tumor that was on my ovary. While all of that was going on, a very close friend of mine lost her son to domestic violence. And both of those things together were kind of weighing at the same time. And I said, okay, I can put both of these things together. And so that's how Beautiful Faces Foundation ended up having a cancer side and a domestic violence side. And I like to call them action. We always speak to domestic violence awareness and domestic violence acknowledgement. Same with Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I like to call this Action Month and kind of replace that awareness with action, because once we're aware, what do we do next?
And that's a great thing to mention. Like, once we're aware, what do we do next? Because, obviously we're aware that this takes place, even though I feel personally, especially from my experience, there's a lot of stigma still involved. It's still, after all this time, it's still a taboo subject because I think it's one of these things where people question a lot. Well, why did you get in this situation? Why didn't you leave? Or why did you stay as long as you did? It's just something that I think it's like a wheel that happens, with this particular subject. So I do agree with, yes, it's one thing to be aware, but what's the action so that we can have preventative measures and things to help people. So one thing that I definitely, as I mentioned off camera, that I wanted to touch on is the post-separation abuse. Because as I mentioned, I think one of the biggest conversations with domestic violence, again, like I said, there's a lot of stigmas. People tend to question the person that has been involved in it. And I think they question and I don't use the V word, I don't use victim. They question the other party as opposed to the person that's done the abuse. The person who's received the abuse, I feel, gets questioned and interrogated up and down. How did you get in this situation? Why didn't you leave? Or even when you leave, or why did you stay as long as you did? So I wanted to talk about the post-separation abuse, because the post-separation abuse is real, and it's actually the answer to the whopping question of, why didn't you leave soon enough? Why did you stay? I don't think people have a clear picture at all of the post-separation abuse, and that most people who have lost their lives, it happens after they have left. So I think that's something that people aren't aware of. So I wanted to talk about that. So what is your experience with your foundation with the post separation abuse?
I would probably say a good portion of the clients that we service on the domestic violence side, which we are extremely confidential about, a lot of them reach out to us when they're in that transitional period, when they're in shelters, when they are trying to get out. I'll say that I think the first thing that I would like people to think about in that is that domestic violence is very personal to the person that's affected by it and the person that's initiating it. So, just like any other diagnosis or disease, I could have a diagnosis of breast cancer. You could have a diagnosis of breast cancer. It's going to hit both of our bodies very differently. We could do very similar treatments, and it's going to have very different effects because we're two totally different people. And so, in kind of sticking with the what's next mindset, the post I'll say care, the post healing of domestic violence is very personable to the person that was affected by it. And so I think it's a combination of things to self heal. One, what was the extent of the domestic violence initiated to a person? Was it physical? Was it emotional? Was it financial? How did it disrupt your being so that you know how to heal from it? And so that healing is a layering process of a number of resources that are then needed. I highly, highly recommend counseling when a person is ready, not when your family tells you that you need to talk to someone, not when your coworkers try to force you to talk because maybe they recognize that something's different, or maybe you have someone that you've confided in. It is very personable to self. And so, just like when we don't feel well, we know when we get to that point where we need to take medicine. Post domestic violence care, you know, when you're saying, I'm not right. And that healing takes a while. And there's no right or wrong way that that looks. So when the questions come of why didn't a person get out? Why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't you do something else? I think to outside people looking in, it seems simplistic of, oh, I'll just leave, or oh, I'll just do this, or oh, I'll just do that, not understanding how much goes into a relationship. One, how a person views domestic violence is so directly connected to factors of how we grew up, what was normalized growing up, what your tolerance level was. And when you get to a point where you say enough's enough, or even toggling to say, I've had enough, but do I want to give this a little more hope? People with children struggle about their exit strategy if they're fortunate enough to get one. And so that healing process afterwards is not just significant to the person, but then how do you get to a point where you rebuild healthy relationships when you're ready? And it then becomes preventive.
Right, you touched on a lot of points, and for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned is one of the personal reasons why I made a choice to not discuss this last year. So like I said, I've gone through this. Post separation abuse is real, and for other women who are going to tune into this, who've received any type of domestic violence counseling, if they've seen that wheel, the honeymoon period, the cycle, getting back together. From my experience, a counselor I spoke to once said in the situations that she's seen, it normally takes about at least 7 times before a person is finally gone for good.
Mhm.
It's a will that unless a person has experienced it or they have directly worked with it, outside people, they can't comprehend that. And it's not just a matter, like you said, people make it very simplistic when they haven't dealt with it.
Mhm.
And it's not a matter of, okay, this isn't healthy, this is toxic, I'll just leave. If it was only that simple, and you've mentioned so many different things, it's tolerance levels.
Mhm.
It's what a lot of us have grown up with, what we have normalized. It's not just a matter of leaving. And another thing that I think people don't understand, just as you mentioned, tolerance levels, it's what goes through your mind and what you're accustomed to and what you may think is normal that leads into you getting in these situations as well. Self-esteem, confidence. Some of us don't even understand when we're in emotionally abusive relationships because abuse isn't always physical, or sometimes it's a combination of different things, or sometimes, there's been situations where it starts off simple. It's a simple shove sometimes during a bad argument, or getting an extreme verbal lashing out. And then it progresses,
Mhm.
and it's a shock to the system for someone who's on the receiving end of that. So
Right.
it's so many things that goes through your mind, because if you think it's already bad enough that society is questioning you and blaming you, imagine what that person on the receiving end is thinking as well. Because I think we have this false picture of domestic violence, that the abuser's wearing, the wife beater, t-shirt,
Mhm.
sloppy,
Mhm.
sloppy, and
Mhm.
drinking a brewski, and the woman
Mhm.
is this, this weak whatever thing that we put in our minds. That's not the case. Domestic
Good.
violence happens in upper class, middle, whatever. But we have these false perceptions. It happens to educated women,
Mhm.
but we have these stigmas and these false images in our minds, which makes it a worse situation. And again, it's not as simple as, okay, this isn't working, I'm leaving.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
takes
And
a lot.
I think one of the things that's really challenging is a lot of times to people that have never experienced it, they view domestic violence as the woman that's, cuddled in a corner because she has a black eye, or she's been, pushed through a wall, or it's often viewed as physical only. People don't understand the different categories of abuse. One of the things that we focus a lot on in the foundation is male domestic violence. That is oftentimes frowned upon. It's laughed at. It's not considered as being real. And so those are some of the things that we try to talk through and work through. One of the programs that we have at Beautiful Faces is called the Choices Workshop. And Choices I developed to be a youth education platform for how do we start to educate younger generations about better behaviors? How do you better channel anger? How do you deal with conflict resolution? Because some people are literally just seeing what happens or what doesn't happen in their households. And so, to both young men and young women, how do we start to teach younger people where to set boundaries, where to have an internal ticker to say, this is my flag that I'm not going to ignore. Sometimes we get red flags and we tell ourselves it's not that bad, or you think you're rationalizing with yourself continually, and you're thinking it's not going to get that bad. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe it's me. Maybe I did something wrong. Tomorrow will be a better day. But I wish that people remove the mask from domestic violence and understood that it doesn't matter if you're white, black, Asian, another ethnic background. It doesn't matter if you're young, old. It doesn't matter if you are considered a professional. I've heard people say, but I have a great career, and this shouldn't have. Doesn't matter. And so there is no face to who and how can be affected from it. And if we take away the traditional physical aspect of it that a lot of people focus on, and we focus on the things that we can't see visually. So what about the mental effect that domestic violence has? What about the emotional, spiritual, financial effects that domestic violence harm and disrupt that can't be seen? And those are the things that I think aren't put into conversations enough so that they become dominant enough thoughts that even when you may confide in someone, they're thinking forwardly about all those things. And so the conversation changes a little bit. It doesn't become, why are you staying? It may shift to, how are you doing? Or how are you managing? Or how are you maintaining? Because it seems that that's not a question that's asked very often. Nobody says, how are you enduring this? It's more often, well, why are you putting up with it? And so I think from a education standpoint, even those of us that may be close to a family member, a friend that you kind of notice when something is off. Excuse me. Sorry.
Right.
You kind of
Right.
notice when something's off. If a person trusts you enough to share with you, that is such a confidential space. It's such a time for you to maybe just be still and listen and say, wow, this person shared this with me. And not that's not a time for you to turn into, master reporter with a ton of questions, but maybe just say, how can I help? What can I do? And sometimes those of us that have found ourselves in domestic violence situations, in your head, you're developing a plan. Sometimes you don't know if it's going to work or not. Sometimes you don't know when you're going to execute it. But there's so many different things that are going on simultaneously that you just need someone to be graceful with you and maybe not ask a single question at all. Be aware, be alert, and maybe insert your advice if asked. But sometimes you just need a landing space of someone that you feel safe and trusted to talk to.
Mhm. I think
Mhm,
one of the biggest issues is the shame involved with it and the judgment. Um, and one of the questions, like you mentioned, I think one of the best questions you can ask someone is, "How can I help you?"
mhm,
Because when you're in that situation, sometimes it is a hopeless feeling sometimes,
mhm,
because you can't figure out how to escape these situations. And again, I know from my personal experience and from what I know of others, generally you have a picture of what the post separation abuse can look like. And that's in your mind when you're trying to figure out how to leave. And
mhm,
it's not a simple thing, it's extremely complex. And again, there's so many stigmas, so there's an unfortunate judgment, which adds already to the shame that the
mhm,
person on the receiving end is dealing with, and it's really unfortunate. So I just think, again, like, safe spaces are needed and a safe listening ear. And like you said, sometimes just to have someone listen who you may not even want to necessarily receive anything at that moment, but you just may need to just talk about what's happening so it can alleviate the shame that's taking place and the fear that you're living with. And then further down the line, it's wonderful when you can have someone that can just simply ask, how can I help?
mhm,
And having resources as well, for that safe space, because leaving is just the first step. There's so many things that fouls it. There's financial abuse, there's the PTSD that
mhm,
comes into place, there's the need for counseling in
mhm,
order to fill in those broken pieces emotionally that you've gone through. If there's children involved, that's a whole different ball game. The children need help. You need help too, just as a parent, on how to heal, to move on. It's just so many different levels involved. And again, I think domestic violence is something that's really unique because there's still a lot of work to be done,
absolutely.
because there's still a lot of stigma
Sure,
all the time.
sure,
I've seen it personally. So
mm,
that's just one of the things that just makes this situation extremely complex to help people, because
sure.
there's so much work that still needs to be done.
Absolutely. And so much work that needs to be done from a day-to-day understanding from just people that may be in your immediate circle, but so much work that also needs to be done from a legislative perspective. I was having a conversation recently, and I'm in the state of Pennsylvania, about there is a PFA in the state of Pennsylvania that allows both parties of a domestic violence situation to reside in the same residence. And I have a hard time wrapping my head around the logic of that one. If someone needs a protection from abuse order, Why do we even have a legislation existing that allows that person to stay in the same residence as their abuser? And so lots of work absolutely is needed to be done, and for us to show up in spaces that are going to begin to change how some of these outcomes look and how some of these outlets look. So things like how do you access a PFA? A lot of times local law enforcement is very limited to when they can enforce um, different things. So if you have an incident at home and you call the police and the police come, and it may not be that, again, you're curled up in a corner because you were just physically abused so bad that you can't stand, and the police go, oh, well, tomorrow morning you can go and get a protection from abuse order, or you can go and do this or go and do that. But in that moment, you're looking for a right now solution. And I think sometimes people feeling like they don't have that option, or the resources that are available are not as effective as they're hoping, it tends to make them hesitate at their outreach. So, do I call the domestic violence hotline? No, I'm not going to call them, because this is shared things that people have shared with me in different conversations. No, I didn't call them because what were they going to do but tell me to call the police? And if I call the police aren't going to make him or her leave. They're going to tell me to wait until the next day. Your life is in the balance in a domestic violence situation. And so there is definitely a lot more to be done as we bridge the gaps of awareness and action.
Mhm.
And in that action piece, where do we need to build better resources? Where do we need to build better outlets to see some of these outcomes go differently? Because I think you and I both know that a lot of people don't make it to the post transitional phase. A lot of people are losing their lives to domestic violence situations that some of them chose to never speak about. And there's no shame in that. Sure, that's hard for a family to accept. It's hard for friends to receive, to say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So and so seemed like they were a happy couple. They, pardon me, they seemed like everything was fine. And so those are some of the things that we have to begin to be more aware of. And it's not that you want to go around inserting yourself unsolicited into everyone's business, but there are certainly ways to pay attention um, when you think something's off in a certain situation, and softly let a person know, I recognize that something doesn't seem quite right. I'm here if you need to talk. I'm here if you want to talk, or simply, how can I help?
Mhm. Right,
Hmm.
definitely. How can I help? I think one of the things that causes issues as well is because, as we mentioned, the wheel, the cycle. I
Hmm.
think sometimes people who have maybe helped people in those situations, sometimes they feel burned when the person goes back. But I
Hmm.
think what, again, it's about being educated and having more conversations, because I think what sometimes people don't understand, they reduce it down into something simplistic, like we discussed.
Hmm.
Oh, they're abusive, you should just leave.
Hmm.
It's not that simple.
Hmm.
If only it could be that simple. And that's why the will happens. That's why they go back. Because if you help someone if you break it down on an infantile level and say, hey, here's a few $100s or something, I'll help you leave.
Hmm.
There's other ramifications that follows. If you just
Sure.
help someone leave, and I'm trying to break it down to sound as simple as possible, the counseling, where's the counseling? Where's the therapy? Where is, the help with the financial abuse, the emotional abuse, the PTSD, the
Hmm.
post separation abuse, the harassment that happens if you have children, the threatening of custody, there's so many other things that comes about. And I think that is where the help may break down, where there's people who may have resources to help someone, but they, in their mind, they're like, well, I did this minor thing for them. and they went back
Sure. And
because
that's
they
okay
chose to
because
leave.
sure, people have to understand that helping is not inclusive to that person saying I'm going to walk away and I'm completely wrapped up here. Like I'm just ready to walk out the door because you pull into my driveway at 3 a.m. because I chose to call you doesn't mean that I don't have to return to this space tomorrow for a number of reasons. And it certainly should not be contingent upon whether or not that person extends himself to you again or however many additional times that you need. Because sometimes you may have a person says, "Well, nope, don't call me anymore because I've been there twice and you still stay in it and what are you doing?" And people don't understand when you speak to the post-abuse transition, safety is a huge factor of that. And so when you look at those elements, how does it affect your employment? How does it affect your social life? How does it affect your family? Can I safely go to work without someone maybe stalking or following me? Can I safely get through my workday without harassing phone calls or emails or text messages? Those are all things that still keep you very bound to a domestic violence situation far after you may have physically left the environment where you coexisted with your abuser. So those are things that I hope people will begin to think about a little more diligently in the processes that they may find themselves in affected to domestic violence situations.
Hmm. And that's a reality. Everything that you mentioned. And again, if only people understood, it's just not a simple thing of, hey, I'm just gonna pack my bags and leave. If only that was the case. But it's not. How can we? What can we do to, I guess, build the conversation to maybe do our parts, as you mentioned, in action, the
Hmm.
verb of just having more conversations and erasing some of these stigmas, bringing more education in our community, also our legislative leaders, when we do have some chances, what can we do to erase some of these stigmas?
And so I think having the conversations and having platforms for the conversations, including, or let me say, in addition to the counseling, we do a support group. We are not able to publicly list where that support group is. When people reach out to us, once they are technically considered a client in our system, we are able to share confidential locations with them because their safety is of the utmost importance. And we never want to compromise a situation where we've listed something publicly and the people that space is not intended for somehow end up in that space, if that makes sense. But support groups are important. Something interesting happens when a collective of people come together that have a common denominator in anything and they begin to pull resources beyond what even programs we design in organizations. They begin to share stories and they begin to share ideas, and it may be, well, hey, Kim, I did XYZ. And while Rhonda, who's sitting on the other side of the room, may not verbally say anything in that space, a light bulb just went off for her. And she's thinking, oh my goodness, I never even thought of that. And so, as a person internally begins to build their exit strategy or their recovery plan or a little bit of both, having spaces for those conversations are important. I don't know about you, but I grew up in church and I grew up in a Baptist church where I went to first and second service and we were in church for everything. And at some point, the church used to be the cornerstone of healing. And I don't necessarily mean that just in a physical sense, I mean that from your internal being. And I don't mean that from sitting in an all night prayer meeting or going to noonday prayer per se, certainly not taking away the importance of whatever faith one chooses to connect to, but I mean that in just providing an environment where people could have conversations. And so you were able to sit in a corner and have a conversation with an elder or with another woman. And guess what? That became your counseling session because somebody cared enough to listen, somebody else felt safe enough to talk, and people healed that way. And so we have to begin to, one, be willing to be vulnerable where we're not okay. It's okay to not be okay. And it's okay specifically to tell another sister, I'm not good today. And you may or may not choose to engage why you're not good, but you've just given yourself permission to say, I'm not okay. People traditionally say, how you doing? And everybody expects to hear, oh, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm doing great. When internally you're like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm gonna make it through the next hour. But we don't normalize being able to say that. And so we need to continue to create safe spaces to do just that, to dialogue about these things and to share one with another. I think from a legislative perspective, we need to know who our state representatives are. We need to know what's going on in larger areas of how judicial systems are tackling domestic violence things in courthouses. How does this affect me if I end up having to go to court for this? Or how does this affect me on this realm? Or what's the law? What's going to be allowed? What's not going to be allowed? Where's the gray area for that? And so if we don't know what's going on, we don't know who to talk to. Sadly, a lot of people have no idea who their local legislators are. Everybody looks to see what the larger offices are doing, what bills being passed, what happened here, what happened there. But until we start to be the voices to our local legislation, they don't even know sometimes what's important to the population of people that they are designed to service. And so we need to start attending. If your community has a community meeting, go to that community meeting and bring up these topics of discussion that are important to you. Because until we begin to put them on the table, they remain hushed or they remain overlooked sometimes because we have to be the voices that speak up to them. So those are some important key points. I can't stress enough the responsibility that we have to passing a stronger baton to future generations than the ones that were handed to us. And I don't mean that as in our elders failed us, but we have a responsibility to give them something better. And so the generations before us gave us what they gave us, and maybe they dealt with things certain ways. And now we're in a space where we have more technologies, we have more innovations, we have maybe more resources. And so we have that responsibility to teach our children, whether we have biological children that are in our households or if you have nieces, nephews, godchildren, what kinds of conversations are we having with them? Because if we can talk to them about the latest iPhone, if we can talk to them about the latest video game, why aren't we talking to them about setting dating boundaries before they even begin to date? Why aren't we talking to them about good behaviors? And I think people getting upset in the emotion of anger is just as normal as laughter. But how we address it and how we learn what to do with it becomes so important. So little boys are often told, when they express emotion, tough it up, be a man. You better not cry. You better this, you better that. And so hurt, I have seen so many unaddressed hurt people that shift that to anger because they didn't learn the appropriate way to deal with the root cause of the anger. And so I think we also have a responsibility to talk to our young men and our young women. At what point do we teach our young women, you have to have some boundaries? If he raised his voice, that might be a boundary for one person, or he or she, whatever a person's dating dynamic is. But how do we begin to recognize what is abnormal for one's person? We learn those things at home. I learned how to sit like a lady from my grandmother. You cross your legs. If your knees were showing in your skirt, you put something in your lap. Those are learned behaviors. And so it starts with what we're teaching to hopefully save future generations and save ourselves. Because it's never too late to set a boundary. It's personal to you. It takes some adjusting for the people in our space. If you've always let people come in your house and put their feet on your coffee table, and then on a random Wednesday you say, up, screeching halt, no more feet on my coffee table, most people are going to give you some pushback. Well, what do you mean? I've always done it. Yeah, you may have always done it, but not anymore. And so for those of us that are already there, we have to just kind of rip the page and maybe initiate some new rules. And for those younger ones that are coming up behind us, we need to set good foundations for them. Mm-hmm.
I agree because, our elders gave us all they could.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's just plain as that. They gave us what they could give us,
Mm-hmm.
whether it helped us or did not help us as far as how we view relationships or viewed boundaries or viewed self-love. At the end of the day, they gave us what they could.
Mm-hmm.
As far as our generation, again, and I do agree about it's about passing that baton on,
Mm-hmm.
because as you mentioned, we can teach our young boys and our young girls to love themselves. We can teach our young boys, that they are little kings, that they can value themselves and that they can show their emotions so that they don't have all this bottled up, pent up anger. You can cry, you can be hurt, you can express yourself. We can tell our young women that you can be confident, and also we can have conversations too where relationships don't have to be our defining factor.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's okay to be alone. It's okay to be single. You don't have to rush into anything that
Absolutely.
doesn't make you feel happy, that doesn't feel good, that doesn't make you comfortable, just to wear this badge of saying that you're with someone too. There's so many conversations that we can start off with our youth alone
Mm-hmm.
to pass on a stronger baton, to build them up so that they can have healthy relationships. And healthy relationships doesn't always mean having a partner, a healthy relationship with yourself
Absolutely.
in order to move on and to be healthy and to have this next generation that doesn't have to repeat some of the cycles that, some of us have gone through. It's so many conversations that we can have. And again, it's never too late to have a boundary. For our current generation, domestic violence is something that is more common than a lot of us realize
Mm-hmm.
because, again, abuse isn't always this woman with the black eye, the broken arm in the corner. And again, with the abuser, he's wearing, the torn, you know, tank top,
Mm-hmm.
drinking a beer. That's not the correct image, that we've placed in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
It's never too late to have a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
We can have more conversations. There's emotional abuse, there's mental abuse, there's the PTSD that
Mm-hmm.
comes afterwards. But again, it's never too late to have a boundary.
Right.
And some of us are walking around in shame, and in silence as well. And some of us maybe have someone that really can give them some resources that can help them. But
Mm-hmm.
there's the shame that's involved too, but again, it's never too late. And I know that healing is a process. It's not something that happens overnight,
Mm-hmm.
but it can happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it is an ongoing thing. So it's not like, it's just an automatic, eventually one day, like it's totally all the pain has disappeared completely. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. But you can move past it. You can build yourself up. It's okay. You can really have the life that you deserve. And what I mean by that is have the happiness and have that value and that self-worth. It is possible to move on. It's not an easy thing, and that's something, that I definitely understand. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an ongoing thing in it. It's an emotional it's an emotional thing too, because there's going to be certain triggers, there's going to be certain things that may bring you back mentally to that space, or sometimes having that, why did I end up in this situation?
Sure.
Sometimes that weighs on people too.
Mhm.
But again, if we can just acknowledge too that there is a such thing as post separation abuse, and if we just can have more conversations and have the resources for the therapy and the healing, and again, if we just look at our current generation ahead of us, and if we can just start off while they're young and just teach our boys and our young girls to just love themselves and value themselves, and it's okay to show your emotions, it's okay to learn to process your anger, we could possibly, make a bigger difference,
Right.
hopefully, you
Right.
know. So I definitely enjoyed this conversation. Like I said, from my personal experience, it's not an easy thing sometimes to discuss this, but I definitely wanted to get back into having more conversations with this. Like I said, I dealt with domestic violence for quite a long time, and the post separation abuse is real, and I know all too well. But I do think, again, that I really wish that this wasn't something that is still a topic that's filled with misconceptions or
Mhm.
shame involved.
Mhm.
That's one thing that I really wish would change. Like, if someone tunes in, if they're in a situation currently, you have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. And I think that's the main thing that, I would like to express for people, or people who are out of it. Once you have left, if you're dealing with post separation abuse, there's the shame involved. There's so many judgments involved, and it's okay. You don't have to feel any less than because you've gone through this situation. It doesn't make you less than a person. And I think that's one of the things too with the physical abuse. It's not all physical, it's a mental breakdown that
Yep.
takes place to reduce a person, to make them think in some type of sense that they deserve that
Mhm.
type of treatment. And that's definitely not the case. So
Mhm.
I wanted to thank you, of course, for this conversation. But
Thank
before we
you.
end everything, tell everyone how they can learn more about your foundation if they want to reach out to you. And I know there's a lot of anonymity involved, obviously, but I know that we can still direct them to your website, and possibly they can learn more and maybe how they can help.
Absolutely. So online, we are at beautifulfacesfoundation.org. We do have a confidential chat feature. If someone doesn't want to call in, as soon as you hit the website, there is an option to initiate a chat with one of our care coordinators. We service the entire United States. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Beautiful Faces. If you want to reach me directly, I am on Facebook at Kia Harris Carr, on Instagram, Becoming Kia. So our phone numbers are there, our email addresses are there. I encourage all of you, if we can help, if you want us to bring one of the workshops to you, we will bring a workshop to another state, to a facility of your choice. And so if any of your viewers are watching this and they're interested in bringing one of the choices workshops to their facility, please reach out to us to coordinate more details on that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this conversation. And I know,
Thank
again,
you.
this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but again, let's put some action to this. And also, domestic violence is something that we can put action to, helping one another, and also having these conversations, not just for the month of October, but for 365 days a year. And again, anyone that's tuning in who may be in a situation, please do not be ashamed. Just seek some help, whether it's just having a conversation on what steps you can take in order to receive some help to possibly come up with a way to leave. And if you're dealing with post separation abuse as well, please seek out some of these wonderful organizations like Kia has, that's all throughout the country, to receive some help. And again, I definitely do understand. And I hope that this conversation does raise more awareness. And I hope, in addition, it could possibly have some honesty that we brought to just break down some of these stigmas so that people can receive help. And again, we can start with our youngsters, just having some conversations to build that confidence in them. So hopefully certain cycles aren't repeated. And again, I just want to show some love to people who are tuning in, because I definitely know that this is a tough subject and more people have dealt with this than we do realize. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. You can catch more conversations like this and others, www.goqueen.com. Please be safe and go love yourself.
That must